Welcome back to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam. Today's special guest is American Civil Liberties Union of Florida Interim Executive Director Howard Simon. Howard was the head of the ACLU for many years before he retired in 2018. He is back again and on his way out the door shortly. We will be talking about the legislature, the governor, the ACLU's court battles, wins and losses, lots on deck. First post-session episode. Please join us today. Special guest, Howard Simon.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. Today's special guest is a longtime buddy of mine, Howard Simon, the executive director of the ACLU of Florida. He retired for a minute and came back, and I think he's leaving again. He just can't quit us, guys. Welcome to A Deeper Dive, Howard. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Dara. Nice to be with you.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. Let's get a little bit of sort of housekeeping out of the way. Let people know what the ACLU is, what you do, how you're a membership-driven organization, how do people get involved, and then after you tell us about the organization in general, I'd like you to tell me how you got involved with the ACLU.
Oh boy, wow. Okay. Well, people know the ACLU, I hope, the American Civil Liberties Union. We're about just over 100 years old, founded in 1920. The ACLU affiliate in Florida was founded in 1965, although we had some local chapters since 1955. We are, as you said, a membership organization. Anybody can join the ACLU. We're a non-partisan organization devoted to the defense of the elements of the Bill of Rights and other constitutional freedoms. We defend everybody's rights, regardless of their political point of view. We're a public policy organization, which means that we try to advance policies that protect people's rights, and mostly for the last several years, fighting policies in Florida that restrict people's rights, which means, we defend freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to associate, the right to protest government policies, the right of privacy, the right to equal treatment of the laws, and so on. So we're a public policy organization, as I said. We do a lot of our work through the courts, by challenging unconstitutional policies passed by local governments and the state legislature. But we do, we organize town halls, public forums, publish books and magazines and so on, and just try to educate and inform people of what their rights are.
And how did you get involved with the ACLU, Howard?
Wow, that goes back. That's funny. Let's see. I think it was my first day on a college campus when I was a freshman in college. I registered for classes. I picked up my books. I went and I heard a big ruckus and people on a microphone up on the lawn of the campus, where there were hundreds of people there in a protest demonstration that looked like it was being led by professors of the Department of Political Science. And it was a ban, and they were protesting a government-imposed ban on speakers that were affiliated with the Communist Party. And just as I got to the top of the hill, I'll never forget this my whole life. Just as I got to the top of the hill, there was the chair of the political science department reciting probably the most classic opposition to censorship John Stuart Mill's 1859 essay on liberty. And that made me devoted to the First Amendment, devoted to those issues that led me to the ACLU. 4 or 5 years later, I ended up spending some time in the South during the March for voting rights. I was an assistant to and Reverend Andrew Young, Martin Luther King's chief assistant in the Selma March. I ran the mimeograph machine for Andrew Young,
Wow.
and that led me to a career of almost 50 years of ACLU devoted to the First Amendment and devoted to protecting voting rights.
Wow. Well, so you were actually in the march on Selma? You were there?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. I was there. I was Andrew Young's assistant to that. We marched the God, I forget how many miles it was. 50 miles, 30 miles. I don't remember. Marched the whole way to spent time in Brown's Chapel listening to Martin Luther King and Selma. It was, I have to say, a life-changing event. It led me to, I came back, finished graduate school, started working for the ACLU as the executive director of the ACLU of Michigan in 1974, worked for the ACLU of Michigan from 1974 to 1997, and then came to Florida to be the director of the Florida ACLU from 1997 to 2018. Ironically, I helped write the constitutional amendment to give voting rights back to felons who completed their sentence. That passed in 2018, and I retired. I say ironically because
Mm-hmm.
my career almost began with the work for voting rights and for the Voting Rights Act that was passed after the Selma March, and then I retired after the restoration of voting rights constitutional amendment passed in Florida.
Well, when I wrote the story when you retired in 2018, my lead was Howard Simon began his career fighting for voting rights, and he'll end more than 4 decades of civil rights advocacy championing the same issue.
Yeah.
So that was that was a few years ago. Now you're back.
And
Lot
I want to say I'm just back as the interim director.
interim director.
There will be a new director probably within, I don't know, 2 months.
Okay.
I hope.
Can you give us a hint as to who that will be? Is it going to be a name that I'm familiar with?
I don't know, and if you're familiar with them or not, but even if I did know, I'm I'm not going to piss off my board of
Okay.
directors by leaking.
All right. Well, you can't blame a girl for trying, Howard.
Right.
Well, the
That's what
legislature.
that's what makes you always a good reporter.
Well, thank you for that. But you have a lot. The legislature has kept the ACLU quite busy, particularly during the DeSantis administration. So I'm going to let you talk about you've been doing this for 5 decades. What stands out to you in terms of where we are now uh, on the civil rights front? What is the biggest change? What is the biggest battle facing civil rights advocates right now?
Wow, that's a really good question. I spent a lot of my years as the director in Florida, 2 terms of the Jeb Bush administration, fighting the Jeb Bush administration over things like voting rights. You'll remember the flawed voting machines,
Mm-hmm.
the the ATM paperless machines on abortion rights and so on. 8 years fighting the Jeb Bush administration on that, and then 8 years fighting the Rick Scott administration over things like, people will remember, the ban on doctors asking patients about if they have guns at
Guns,
home, whether they
right?
should, on
Voting
also
roll
abortion rights,
purges, voting roll
hurting
purges.
purges. But I want to say now we're in the DeSantis administration. And it is really a different breed than the Rick Scott administration or the Jeb Bush administration. This is really European style authoritarianism. Um, this is a governor who claims to be a free speech advocate, but who has decided to run, did decide to run for president on a platform. I think he put all his eggs in the basket of thinking that his anti woke crusade would resonate around the country. And it did not. And the anti woke crusade was really a fight to try to ban ideas. That I don't think we've ever seen that kind of authoritarianism where a governor would tell you what can be taught in classrooms, even in university classrooms, what ideas are prohibited, what ideas can be talked about. The governor, wanted to ban ideas that would make certain people uncomfortable. Imagine, imagine being a university student and being protected from ideas that would make you uncomfortable. That's what university educations are for. Anyway, my point is that the DeSantis administration is a whole different kind of conservatism than the Rick Scott or the even the Jeb Bush kinds of conservative Republican administrations. This is really a Hungarian Viktor Orban type of. I call it the Orbanization of Florida. It's trying to basically ban prohibited ideas.
Um, the legislature took up and passed some of these culture war issues last
Right.
year. I think the main one, I mean, we can talk about a laundry list of them. I think my listeners
Right.
are pretty sophisticated. They're familiar with them. The Stop Woke Act,
Mhm.
um, which is not just in schools, it's in
Right.
businesses, it's in higher education. This year there was the Stop Woke legislation from this year was the one that would ban teaching teacher prep.
Teacher training and
Right,
teacher training. They
right.
would be barred from some kind of reference to any kind of systemic racism in teacher training.
Yeah. So that was about, I was talking to someone who's close to DeSantis not too long ago, and I was asking if there was going to be some more, what the agenda would be.
Mhm.
And this person said to me, "Well, there's really not a lot of woke stuff left." So
Yeah, they've gotten to the bottom of the barrel. I think the only reason that more anti-woke stuff wasn't proposed in this legislative session is they ran out of ideas. But look, I think there's something very interesting that happened in this legislative session. So I say this as an outsider. I mean, I don't say I, we are, as I said earlier, a nonpartisan public policy advocacy organization. But what's really happening, I think, or happened in this legislative session was a family squabble between very conservative Republicans, maybe most led by, I think, by the Senate President, Kathleen Passidomo,
hmm
and the MAGA far right Republicans who condemned her for not implementing the whole Republican agenda that would be much more culture war issues.
hmm
You know, uh, laws that would protect Confederate monuments, laws that would ban the display of pride flags, for example. Uh,
lowering the gun age
to
from
18.
21
We
to
want
18.
to exactly. Um, you know, imposing, making making it a new crime, driving while trans, requiring a transgender person that had a driver's license that reflected their gender rather than their gender at birth and their birth certificate would be committing fraud and therefore a new crime of as I said, driving while trans, um, uh, expanding defamation lawsuits that would
Right.
allow people to sue people for saying bad things about them in the media. Also, I mean you know that battle in which Kathleen Passidomo said the House can pass it, but we're not taking those things up in the Senate, is an internal family squabble in which the Republican Party that controls the Florida legislature has a supermajority in the Florida legislature. It's just going to have to decide what kind of a political party it is. Is it going to be a conservative party, or is it going to be a far right MAGA party devoted to the kind of anti woke crusades that former President Trump has stimulated?
Well, to that point, they passed all the anti woke. I mean, they literally passed a bill that is called Stop Woke last year.
Right.
And that was, I believe it was last year, and it could have, the days run away like wild horses. And maybe that was the 2022 law.
It was. Stop
Okay.
woke was passed
So
in
she
2022.
wasn't Senate president at the time
Right,
then.
right.
So, the Senate traditionally, I think it was Benjamin Franklin or one of the founding fathers that called the Senate, the U.S. Senate, the saucer that cools the tea. So the
Yeah,
Senate has been the more moderate chamber over the years. We have seen as the Republican Party has shifted farther to the right, we've seen that happen in the Senate, along with term limits and a lot of members coming over from the House.
yeah.
So the makeup of the legislature, as you say, there's a Republican supermajority in both chambers. Democrats, there's very little they can do to put the
Right.
brakes on some
But
of
here,
these
I mean,
ideas.
but here's the interesting issue. How much of DeSantis's anti-woke agenda is being blocked by the courts? Maybe not surprising by the federal district court judges who have been protecting civil rights here in Florida for many, many years, but now even by Trump appointee judges on the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. So much of DeSantis's program is tied up in preliminary injunctions, many of which I have to say I'm proud that the ACLU has secured on some of the anti-woke stuff, on some of the anti-immigrant legislation, on many of the items, and the amount of money that is being spent by the DeSantis administration pursuing the defense of laws that they know full well are unconstitutional. And I think this is disgraceful that the legislature votes for, knowing full well that it's unconstitutional. I think, frankly, all of this was thought to be necessary by the governor to create his agenda and platform to run for president of the United States. But I think that gamble about running as the anti-woke candidate, boy, that fell flat. And the rest of the country just seemed to be not interested in that. They want to know more what's happening with their uh, home insurance, with clean water, with access to health care, real problems for which there are real, genuine Republican solutions.
I'm not sure that I 100% agree with you, Howard, because I think part of the reason why his
Yeah.
presidential bid failed was Donald Trump.
Well,
And,
right, right.
so I think and I read a story today as we're recording this about him getting together with donors and having kind of an apology tour or whatever you want to call it. And they are preparing for 2028. There's no
Yeah,
question about
right,
that.
right.
So, different time, different place might have a different outcome. This anti-woke stuff is running rampant throughout state houses that are dominated by Republicans and in states with Republicans. So I don't, Florida might want to, DeSantis might want to call himself the leader on this. I do think it's interesting the point you raise about the courts. The 11th Circuit, that's our Atlanta-based appellate circuit, is dominate. I think there are many Trump appointees on there now. So it's a conservative appellate court. This First Amendment business is a real deal to them.
Yeah. They understand it better. They're more consistent. They're not willing to throw it out. The lecture that he got, oh my God, the lecture that DeSantis got from the panel, two of them were Trump appointees,
Yeah.
the 3-judge panel, about, how is this in any way consistent with Republican and conservative principles? You're going to dictate to the private sector what a private sector employer can do in terms of training their workforce.
This was
to
the
be more-
Stop Woke Act. So there were 3 lawsuits. There are 3 lawsuits. One is
Right.
From the businesses, challenging for the businesses. One is the schools, public schools, and the
K
other,
through 8.
right, and the other is the
Higher
higher
ed,
education. And I think there's an argument coming up in that case
Yes.
next month, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's our case, and our lawyers are preparing
Yeah.
for it now.
We have a new email address, and we'd love to hear from you. To reach us and give us your input, tell us what you'd like to hear. Tell us what you thought about what you already heard. Tell us how fabulous we are. Join the Deeper Divas team. Send an email to podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. That's podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. And I promise I will read everyone. I'm curious about some of the legislation. I kind of alluded to this earlier. Some of the legislation being passed in Florida is being used as a model in other states. Are other states reaching out to you as a resource, or to the ACLU of Florida as a resource as they battle some of these culture war issues?
Well, it's because of the leadership of our governor on this. Our governor tried to make himself, yes, some of the stuff that has passed here is they try to replicate elsewhere. I would say particularly things around voting. There was an effort this session to ban mail voting, the no excuse mail ballots. That didn't pass. But I think that's cropped up in many other states, in part, I think, probably by the hostility to mail-in ballots.
Which is so crazy to me, because Florida, that's part of how Republicans got control of both chambers of the legislature, was through mail-in voting. I mean, they got that down to very scientific, they were methodical in their mail-in ballot.
They captured control of Florida government, but now the former president indicates that we shouldn't trust mail-in balloting.
Donald Trump.
So now they're caught between a rock and a hard place, between what has worked successfully for them and what the former president doesn't like. And so, some people slavishly follow the former president. Others see that doing so just amounts to shooting themselves in the foot.
You guys have been involved in a lot of election-related issues. You did, as you talked about the Amendment 4 that would that the way the legislature, that is one that you guys did not win. The challenge to the implementation of Amendment 4. requirement of paying the fines and fees, which has turned out to be very problematic for people with, for not so much necessarily for newly convicted folks or newly released folks, but for folks who were released many years ago and are trying to gather all that information and pay those fees and plus interest. And what are your thoughts about the implementation of Amendment 4?
Well, I have to say that the legislature was completely disingenuous in passing that bill, but the courts, the 11th Circuit, the federal district court wrote a long 150-page or so opinion that is a really important history of voting discrimination in the state of Florida. Anybody who wants to know anything about the history of the state of Florida should read Judge Hinkle's opinion, which was then overturned by the 11th Circuit. But what the 11th Circuit decision has inflicted on the state of Florida seems to me to be an injustice that should not be allowed to stand. What they have left us with is that in order to vote, just as Judge Hinkle said, we have a pay to vote system. You have to pay in order to vote. So you have to pay your outstanding legal financial obligations. But the state of Florida has no obligation to tell you if you owe anything and how much, and if so, how much you owe. I mean, that is a catch-22 that the 11th Circuit panel left us with. It is, I think, an intolerable discriminatory injustice. You have to pay, but the state doesn't have any obligation to have a system in place to tell you how much you owe or whether you owe anything. And if you try to vote because you think you don't owe anything, then you run the risk of committing another felony.
So thanks again for joining us today. There's a couple of other things that the legislature did pass this year, and I wondered if you wanted to weigh in on a few of them. The abolishment of the civilian review boards.
Mhm.
That's kind of a big deal. The
Criminalizing bystander, making sure that Florida will never have a George Floyd situation. Not that an officer will not inflict a horrible situation on a person, but that people will not, to make it more difficult, that people will be unable to record it and that the public will learn about it by criminalizing anybody who is within 25 feet of a police interaction with another citizen, making it difficult to record it. That, I think, is an outrage. I think a lot of what the legislature does is create problems that involve litigation that takes years to unravel, to figure out, and most of which turn out to be decisions that what they do is unconstitutional. So, for example, the legislature passed something enticing, trying to entice any of the 67 Florida school districts into having chaplains now being in the school. And if any of the school districts take the legislature up on that and having to choose which chaplains from which religious denomination gets to be in the public school and which not, they're only going to be involved in a lawsuit that will last 5 to 10 years.
That school chaplains did get a lot of attention. I think parents have to opt in,
Right.
but there's a concern about separation of church and state.
Yeah, well, whatever happened to separation of church and state? Right. Exactly. That seems to be a constitutional principle in which the courts in Florida have just looked the other way.
So, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we say goodbye?
Well, I do want to warn people about one other thing. It kind of is all wrapped up in the issue that we talked about a minute ago about whether the courts will allow the people of Florida to amend their own constitution to protect the right to abortion. But as part of that, there's a pending decision about a 15-week abortion ban, which might trigger a 6-week abortion ban. What people might need to know, should know about that, is that the desire to end abortion rights in Florida for some people is so strong that in order for the courts to uphold that 15-week or 6-week abortion ban, they will need to reinterpret and abolish people's constitutional right to privacy. That's the basis for this this lawsuit. And in order to do that, we may be on the verge of losing our right to privacy as a price to be paid for the legislature's desire to restrict an abortion right to 6 weeks.
How would that affect people in other ways other than abortion rights?
You have to think of all the ways in which people have a right to privacy about, for example, the right to be, the right to make other medical decisions, including end of life decisions, the right to educate your child at home in homeschooling, the right to be free to read what you want to read in the privacy of your own home, the right to be free from surveillance in your own home or in your backyard by police drones. Privacy means a lot of things, way broader than the right to women to terminate a pregnancy. And the court is going to have to probably reinterpret all of that, and we may lose our right to privacy if the court upholds. That's the price we may have to pay for the court upholding a 6-week abortion ban. We may be on the verge of losing a right to privacy that goes into lots of different areas of our personal freedom.
Well, on that note, on that cheery note,
on that happy note.
Thank you, Howard Simon, Interim Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida. We catching you on the way out the door. You've been my friend for many, many years. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. A pleasure to spend the time chatting with you, Dara.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.